History claims empires are toppled by armies, but the most devastating sieges often begin in the bedroom. In the year 38 AD, at the pinnacle of Roman dominion, a teenage bride entered the gilded halls of the Palatine. Her name was Valeria Messalina, just 15, bound in marriage to Emperor Claudius, a man decades her senior, physically weak, yet cloaked in the absolute power of the throne. To the citizens of Rome, this union was a symbol of hope. A young empress of noble lineage, destined to represent modesty, provide offspring, and secure a bloodline still trembling from the insanity of Caligula. But behind the public celebration, a different story was unfolding, one that would etch her name into history as Rome's most debauched empress. Initially, Messalina played her part flawlessly. Chroniclers wrote of a beauty that captivated the city, fair complexion, hair like spun gold, and the refined features of her aristocratic rank. She fulfilled her early obligations without complaint, bearing Claudius 2 heirs and attending official functions with poise. In a society that rigidly separated women into the chaste matron and the common harlot, she was the living emblem of purity. But what if the immense gap between the virtue Rome imposed and the dark craving she harbored became the very force of her downfall? Did you know it's said that Messalina would escape the palace after dark, hidden beneath the guise of a common streetwalker, to labor in a brothel in the Suburra? The historian Tacitus reports she challenged the city's most infamous prostitute, determined to outlast her in a contest of endurance. Imagine the horror of a patrician entering such a squalid place, only to find the emperor's wife staring back at him. This was not born of need. It was a product of thrill, of defiance, a calculated move to turn her own sexuality against a culture that worshipped her innocence. The brothel exploits were merely the opening act. Within the palace, she transformed Claudius's court into a stage for obscenity. Picture the lavish feasts, silken couches, golden trays laden with delicacies, wine flowing endlessly from gem-encrusted goblets. Senators lay in nervous quiet, while Messalina commanded the scene not as a hostess, but as a ringmaster, calling upon gladiators still sweating from the sands, prisoners from conquered lands, and the sons and daughters of nobility for her degrading entertainments. She learned that shame could break a man more completely than any blade. One hushed tale describes a wager between herself and Rome's premier courtesan, Sylla, betting she could surpass the professional in a test of stamina. At sunrise, Sylla succumbed after 25. Messalina pressed on, surpassing 30. Her triumph was met not with cheers, but with a terrified silence. Why? Was it boundless desire, or a colder, more strategic ploy to dominate the empire's elite through their own humiliation? Her victim spanned the social order. Military commanders were pressured into compliance. High-born women were manipulated into disgrace. The heirs of senators were pulled into her performances. To reject her was a perilous gamble. Those who refused her often met abrupt, mysterious ends. A tribune discovered in the Tiber. A nobleman stripped of his rank without warning. The lesson was clear. Rome's empress did not tolerate rejection. She even staged rituals that mocked the sacred rites of Venus and Bacchus, first adoring herself in holy vestments, then casting them aside to command participants into lewd acts in the gods' names. For Rome, religion was the bedrock of society. By defiling it, she proclaimed herself the true power, a deity not of devotion, but of control. Consider the emotional devastation left in Roman households. A senator's spouse, publicly shamed, returning home in disgrace. A young woman taken from her family's villa, returned days later, her spirit shattered. Claudius, often depicted as feeble or naive, appeared either unaware or unwilling to intervene. Was he ignorant or silently complicit? Scholars still debate, yet the outcome remains. Messalina's reputation festered across the realm, not as an icon of dignity, but as a byword for corruption. Even so, the empire persisted. Commerce thrived, legions advanced, Chariots raced in the Circus Maximus. Rome's glorious exterior held firm, while its ethical heart rotted behind sealed doors. Every rumor about Messalina eroded the Senate's prestige. Every outrage weakened trust in the imperial house. Rome, a civilization built on order and integrity, saw its first lady transform desire into a political weapon. The ruins on the Palatine endure. Their murals are worn, their pillars broken. Yet her specter remains, the child bride who evolved into the most dreaded seductress of her age. Her narrative forces a question that echoes through time. What occurs when the figure anointed to represent goodness instead embraces depravity? Authority in Rome was not just recorded in law or sculpted in stone. It was whispered in private chambers, negotiated over banquets, and, in Messalina's instance, exercised through the body of an empress. As her influence grew, her hungers did not fade. They became more audacious, more systematic, and infinitely more treacherous. What started as covert nightly excursions evolved into a sophisticated engine of depravity that ensnared Rome's most influential figures in a web of mortification. Tacitus, Suetonius, and Juvenal, each with their own bias, documented the spiral. They wrote that Messalina created what amounted to a private imperial bordello, concealed within an opulent villa near the Campus Martius. This was no common den of vice. It was an enterprise run with cold precision. Women of rank, threatened with destruction, were made to serve. Senators, generals, and merchants, arriving under deceitful circumstances, found themselves trapped in compromising situations that ensured their obedience. Every secret confessed, every fearful admission made in a moment of weakness was documented by her devoted staff. Later sources allege she leveraged this information to extort whole clans, securing riches, political appointments, and allegiance without deploying a single soldier. The intimate moments of her reign are bone-chilling. Envision a young noblewoman seized from her home and compelled to play the whore under Messalina's gaze. Picture statesmen, stripped of their formal wear, forced into degrading performances before their political foes. One soldier who survived the villa said the ordeal was more scarring than combat, confessing, "The memory of blood fades. The memory of disgrace does not." This was Messalina's sinister genius. She realized that sexual humiliation could shatter a man more utterly than violence. Her barbarity was matched by her love of spectacle. By 42 AD, her parties were infamous. Disguised as religious festivals for Venus or Bacchus, they would start with solemn prayers, then devolve into orchestrated orgies where the ruling class performed acts they would never dare speak of. Messalina directed it all like a conductor. Senators were matched with rivals. Generals were forced into grotesque games. Noblewomen were exposed before jeering crowds of the powerful. To refuse meant catastrophe. To comply meant dishonor. All who participated were bound not by fellowship, but by collective, paralyzing shame. The most unsettling story centers not on public display, but on her obsessive need to compete. She approached sex as a gladiatorial contest. Her most famous challenge, the stamina duel against Scylla, Rome's most renowned prostitute, stunned the capital. Before a private audience of elites, Scylla managed 25 men through the night before collapsing from fatigue. Messalina did not cease. She continued past 30, refusing to stop until no contenders were left. By morning, she was victorious, and with that win, demolished the last pretense of Roman honor. The Empress of Rome, Claudius's wife, had made herself a public spectacle, reigning in debasement not as failure, but as victory. Why would a woman reared in luxury, celebrated for her looks, and crowned empress, choose degradation as her ultimate pursuit? Historians seek explanations. Some propose nymphomania. Others suggest a drive for dominance. Some perceive the psychological scars of a youthful marriage to an older, distant husband. Perhaps the reality is more straightforward and more frightening. For Messalina, the contradiction was exhilarating. The more her public image demanded purity, the more intoxicating it felt to violate it. Her empire of lust had real consequences. The Senate, already fragile, found itself paralyzed by extortion. Provincial governors were selected not for merit, but for their coerced loyalty. Military leaders remained obedient not out of duty, but from terror of being exposed. Rome's policies became warped by her invisible influence. Foreign diplomats spoke of bizarre dealings where senators seemed broken and distracted. The empire's leadership was being devoured by one woman's obsession. Decadence creates rivals. The military, long patient with imperial excess, began to grumble. Allegiance weakened when stories circulated that their brothers in arms had been called to Messalina's villa and robbed of their honor before her spectators. For warriors defined by valor, such humiliation was a fate worse than dying. The barracks echoed with muted anger words that elsewhere would be considered sedition. Her suspicion intensified. Guards were increased. Retributions became more severe. The spectacles grew more cruel, as if amplifying the disgrace could smother dissent. Each new act fractured the delicate illusion of her dominion. Rome had endured conflagration, disease, and foreign hordes. Could it survive an empress who governed through degradation? The end came in 48 AD with an act of such staggering boldness it still confounds historians. While Claudius was absent in Ostia, Messalina organized a wedding. Not a hidden affair, but a formal, legally binding Roman marriage to her lover, the senator Gaius Silius. Priests officiated, contracts were signed, witnesses gave their oath. Every legal requirement for a valid union was meticulously observed. By statute, she was now wife to Silius while still being the empress and spouse of Claudius. This was beyond mere outrage. It was blatant treason. She stepped from the shadows into the light. Her lust had morphed into open rebellion. What compelled such recklessness? Did she think Claudius would acquiesce? That the Senate would approve? That Rome would allow its empress 2 husbands? Or was it an uncontrollable impulse, a need to escalate until the only possible outcome was annihilation? Whatever the reason, the act was her undoing. A loyal freedman raced to alert Claudius. At first, he dismissed it as absurd gossip. As evidence mounted, disbelief turned to fury. The emperor, mocked and betrayed, finally took action. Claudius returned to Rome with armed men. Messalina was discovered in the palace gardens where she had ruled as a queen of vice. Ancient accounts depict her final moments with stark detail. She wept and pleaded, offering her children as pawns for mercy. When none was granted, she tried to end her own life, but her courage failed. A tribune drove his sword home. The empress, who had enslaved Rome with shame, perished not in glory, but in terror and gore. Her punishment extended beyond death. Claudius ordered her statues smashed, her name chiseled from public monuments, her memory condemned to eternal erasure, damnatio memoriae. Yet Rome could not forget. The harder they tried to bury her, the more potent her myth became. Stand in the Palatine ruins today, and the air feels thick with ghosts. Tourists admire the ancient art, but the very stones seem to whisper a darker truth. The brothel, the blackmail, the sacrilege, the illegal marriage. Messalina's story survives not because Rome wanted it remembered, but because it was too powerful to be erased. Ultimately, her legacy is a cautionary tale written across the ages. Empires do not crumble solely from external threats. They can implode from a moral decay that festers within their very core. She demonstrated that lust can be as ruinous as any army. She proved that humiliation can enslave men more effectively than iron. History concludes her saga with a brutal fact. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is not a sword.